of the National Academy of Sciences, and I will pull up his presentation here.
He's a friend of mine.
And he's a friend. Here we go. Great. So, Professor Zaslavski.
Great, thank you. So I'm here because I'm a friend of Fritz, so that's a relevant fact. And I really don't claim to have. One of the nice things about working in surveys is that every time you go and listen to people talk, you find out about some amazing thing that people are able to accomplish. And I'm a kind of a shy person, so just being an interviewer seems amazing to me. But the number of things people do, both methodologically and just the kinds of difficult and dangerous places that people go into, always impresses me in sessions like this. So I'm going to, if you don't know a whole lot, that's always pays to at least try to be a little provocative. And so I'm going to try to take a perspective of thinking about fabrication as a statistical procedure. So I would say fabrication can be regarded as a kind of imputation. When you duplicate, you're doing a hot deck in which you're matching on nothing other than being in the frame of the survey. If you duplicate with random modifications, it's kind of like doing a multiple imputation. And also you could think of duplication as being modification of the weights, because you had one observation, you're just increasing the weight by duplicating it. So the point of this kind of odd analogy is that there's not really a totally sharp distinction between this process of creating data ad hoc, which we're trying to fight, and some of the things that we do that are valid. And in a way to evaluate the impact of it, you have to think about how good a job someone is doing in imputing, if you want to think of the fabrication that way. The better the job they do in imputing, the harder it is to detect, but in a sense, the less damage it does to the data set if you don't detect it. Another statistical point about this that I think is really worth emphasizing is that this is a multi-level process. And we know about multi-level modeling as a way of describing data, but fabrication, as we've been hearing in concrete terms in the preceding talks, is actually something which can take place at a variety of levels, and anywhere from a single interview to the interviewer's workload, or maybe the whole area, or all the way up to the level of the entire project. So that means that if we want to deal with it, we need multi-level solutions that try to diagnose and correct the fabrication at all of those levels. Another way of thinking about fabrication is a kind of a game between the survey customer and the survey implementer at these various levels. So the fabricator is trying to reduce effort while still receiving their payment. And the higher the level you go in this process, the greater the risks that are taken. At the lowest level, the risks are fairly small in that if you fill in a few items on a survey on an interview that you've conducted, the chances of being caught are pretty small. The consequences might be small. If you're a large organization and you start fabricating, you could destroy your entire business. So that's the game on the fabricator side. On the data purchaser side, of course, you're paying more for less information, and you may be led into making some incorrect decisions by relying on it. But I think one of the points that came out in earlier presentations again was that loss of credibility has a kind of a cliff loss function. And this is something I've thought about in terms of the loss functions for violations of confidentiality, disclosure, improper disclosure of data. The improper disclosure of one person's data can be nearly as bad as improper disclosure of 100,000 people's data in terms of the loss of of confidence and possible legal implications and so forth. That's not exactly true, but there's a kind of you fall off a cliff, and then maybe if you go further, you roll down the talus at the bottom of the cliff. But falling off the cliff is pretty bad, even if there's very little involved. And I think what we were hearing this morning is that there's something like this going on with respect to fabrication, that if you have fabricated data in the survey, then the entire thing loses credibility. One point we have to consider looking to the future is that these risks may change as the expertise grows on both sides. So we're talking here about trying to enhance our expertise as survey conductors in detecting fabrications and correcting the data sets that are contaminated with fabrications. But it's possible that the other side is also increasing its expertise and trying to reduce its risks in that way. So, following up on that thought a little bit more, thinking of this as a game, in order to think through your strategy in the game, you have to have some assumptions about what the other player is doing. And I think that the assumptions I'm hearing are that the fabricators are not very sophisticated, so that they don't have they may be doing data synthesis, but they don't have very fancy models for doing it. Duplication is about as simple a model as you can get. Going 1 0 1 0 1 0 is, I don't know, it's a little bit more sophisticated because you could go 0 1 0 1 0 1, so at least there's two possible outcomes. But we actually have pretty good methodology being developed out there for data synthesis, and this is for imputation of missing data is one purpose of that. Another is for creating data sets that can be released without violating confidentiality. And these synthesized data sets are supposed to, for all practical purposes, be inferentially equivalent to the real data. So if you can do that, then maybe someone who really wants to do a good job, instead of hiring a bunch of interviewers, can hire one good statistician and create a synthesized data set that'll pass the bar. So I think this is something we have to, an assumption we have to watch if we are dealing with people who are really going all out to fabricate. Although, maybe empirically that the kind of fabrication we have to deal with is much simpler than that. The other assumption, I guess, is that the fabricators don't really want to work very hard at this. They're not trying to avoid a month in the field by spending a month in front of a computer, trying to create a good fabricated data set. And so the relatively moderately sophisticated detection techniques should be enough to detect what they're doing. If the fabricators did try harder, I think we would have to worry about the learning going on both sides and having a kind of a race, like the race that goes on around disclosure, where sort of the main enemy in disclosure is maybe computer scientists trying to show that they can break the system. The other context for thinking about fabrication is in the continuum of survey management, and I think well, all three talks really, but especially the first two, really did a very nice job of placing it in that context. That the things you do to detect fabrication are really no different from the things you do to detect other kinds of survey errors. So if you have poorly designed survey instruments and tools which don't really work very well in the conditions under which the survey was fielded, this could induce fabrication because your interviewers are having a hard time implementing things the way you've told them to implement them. But it could also produce errors which are not due to fabrication, but which are just due to the poor functioning of the of the way the survey was designed. And then you get interviewer errors of various kinds that might have very similar effects to fabrication. So the monitoring that you're doing is not really just for the honesty of the interviewers, but also for the technique and the accuracy of the way they implement the instructions, and in fact the extent to which the instructions can be implemented accurately in the field. So a lot of what we looked at here had to do with detection techniques. So one, I think, important principle is that you have to ideally have management techniques that can detect the errors of these kinds, which could be either fabrication or just simply bad implementation at all levels in a timely way. So if you're talking about what the interviewers are doing, you want this to happen continuously as the data come in from the field. And if you want to detect errors at a higher level, you just have to have things checked as data comes in at that level. Then we have metadata and paradata that adds to the amount of stuff that you can check, use in checking, and that's a tremendous resource that I think might be part of the answer to this problem of not being able to distinguish fake data from real data if it's done well. Oops. Wake up. Okay, maybe someone can deal with this. I'll give an example of a Census Bureau survey that I heard about recently, where one interviewer was just asking one of the questions completely wrong, and this was detected at the end of a year's work when there we go. This was detected at the end of a year's work when the subject matter experts were doing their review of the findings of the survey, and they found that a certain area had just not very sensible results at all. That was an error in management. That's something that should have been found in the first month of survey operation, that this interviewer's work was out of line. So I think this kind of timeliness is something you want to build into your management. And then post-survey analysis, well, there's the whole idea of replication, interpenetrating samples from different interviewers, which was one of the big innovations at the Census Bureau in the 50s, right? Associated with some of the big names there. And then eventually you get to looking at subject matter expertise and statistical outliers to see whether the results make sense. But getting things earlier is better. So just to comment briefly on the talks, I don't really have a lot to say other than that they were really interesting, and it's very encouraging to see the level of development of the systems for doing these things. Regina's talk, I think, had this nice checklist that was focused a lot on making sure that the procedures and management, as well as the subject matter expectations, were reasonable. I think some of the checks on the data itself, the content of the data, had a lot of statistical assumptions, which I don't know how explicit they're made. We look at trends, for example. Do we have an actual empirical analysis of what the trends should look like in that data and how quickly they change, or how quickly levels of certain variables jump? So again, it's not separable from the whole substantive statistical analysis of the study. Rita's, I guess I'd never heard of carry before, and I was glad to find out what it was because it wasn't in the slides. One thing about this is that I know one of the issues in the confidentiality world is that data breaches based on penetrating the non-disclosure aspects of data releases are rarely discussed openly. I think they're discussed maybe in back rooms by the people who work on security, and And I think the kind of anecdotes that Rita had, again, we may not hear them that often because they are a black eye for the firm that was involved. So it was nice to hear some of that expressed directly. Mike Robbins' talk, duplicate detection is really just a form of record linkage. And there's a huge literature, which Fritz has been one of the main contributors to, about methods for record linkage. Oops. Yeah, that's the slide I wanted. For example, in the 2000 census, I don't know how completely this was ever implemented, but there's certainly talk about doing a 330 million by 330 million match of the census to itself to look for duplicates. So the technology for this is really advancing, and I think this allows opportunities to look for links that are imperfect, that are have differences or errors that are small, that might be indicative of minor modifications done in fabrication. But mainly, I'm a guy who likes to do data analysis, and the minute I start reading something, I never get past the first page, and I put it down and I try to do it myself. So I took one of my surveys, and I pulled out a little piece of 5,000 responses, pulled out 27 substantive items, and this one has lots of skipped items, lots of items that are screened out for 60-70% of the respondents, multiple choice, lots of NAs, all the stuff that Mike said was bad. And I just wanted to see what happened. And I thought, this is not going to look anything like his pictures. Well, this is what I get for the distribution over all pairs of agreement. And that's a normal curve superimposed roughly on it. And that looks good. I don't know whether this is a gumble. It doesn't look like his pictures, and we seem to have a lot of cases that might have been flagged as duplicates. I don't think they are because it's a mail survey with telephone follow-up. It's kind of hard to cheat on those things, and it's done by a big company that doesn't want to get a bad reputation. But I think it's pretty interesting that you get a picture like this even with a survey with all of those features. So that made me more encouraged. So just in conclusion, really the essence of everything you do in surveys is to know your data and know your methodology. And I thank the speakers very much for sharing their experiences.
Fritz, we'll do that again. You don't need me.
Yeah, I won't repeat Fritz's introduction, but Fritz will offer the final discussion, and then we'll turn to the Q&A.
You're gonna keep that, okay? You're gonna talk. Are you having fun? I had to put another vest on because I don't, even though I grew up here, it's a little too cold for me today. It's a wonderful topic, wonderful people. We're moving in the right direction. I mean, I was at and helped set up the Washington Statistical Society session, and Steve helped set this one up, okay, because he was at the first one. And we're actually beginning to pay attention to what other people are doing, if they're doing anything. And some people who are not doing anything are beginning to do something because they were embarrassed, or they realized that they should have been doing something, or both. I have a few. I've read all the slides. I listened to everything. I am forever humbled by how much I remain not understanding, but in the presence of such experienced practitioners and smart people, how much I can still learn. Don't quiz me now. Alan, don't quiz me. So I had a good time. There are a lot of people from the Washington Statistical Society who are actually online right now, following up on this. They're living in a much warmer place than I am. And I'll be back there tonight. My wife, who went to MIT, as you heard earlier, was really worried about me coming up here. And so I went out and took a picture, 8 or 9 foot high, right outside the school, the hotel, and sent it. Well, I'll bring it home to her tonight. So what am I going to do? I'm going to talk about each paper briefly. Alan did a wonderful, much better version of what I should have said to start off with. Thank you, Alan. Emphasizing a lot of the same points about the fact that within our own paradigm, we have information that we've created, falsified ourselves, that we can use to understand falsification. That's what the HOTEC and other variations give us. And we should use that tool. We're not doing it for that purpose. Nobody was doing that, and we're still not doing it. We need to change that. Let me pick one highlight about each speaker, maybe two. Let me start with Regina, please. I worked on the State Department work with Regina, and we learned a lot. The data teaches you too. Data humbles you a lot because you think you know the answer. You have a model. Models are so smooth. We saw models from Michael and from Alan. They're just always so smooth, aren't they? But the real world is a little ragged. In one of Regina's slides, when she was looking at the paradigm that she's using to work into the survey world, she talked about a quality control, about post-survey adjustment and quality control. That was one of her slides. And I want to add a slide to that. Maybe it's there implicitly, which is about pre-survey adjustment, which is getting the right paradata collected, and quality assurance. That's an important a technique to get some of the prevention steps done. That's nothing big, no big deal there. Now, it's been mentioned now by Alan, thank you, that I'm working on a second edition of a book I did with Bill Winkler and Tom Herzog. Bill Winkler was the guy who did the 300 billion by 300 billion matrix at the Census Bureau. So he does a lot of record linkage stuff. And I'll come back to record linkage with you, Michael, because I learn all the time. This is why I grew up where I did. Anyway, I recommend that book, the second edition, but I don't recommend it this year. It's got delayed. It'll come out by the end of the year. And it'll have a lot about fabrication in it. Because when we did the first edition, we didn't have anything about fabrication. We blew it. We missed it. So we're guilty. But life brought me to a lot of things that maybe change. And if we have questions, I'll talk about the Lancet survey later. Because that was one of the main convincing things for me. Rita, wonderful, wonderful talk. Because you're a geek and I'm a geek, okay, I am. We're the big survey organizations are Westat, RTI, where I am at NORC, Mathematica, have all got the message. Some of the emphasis is different, as Rita said privately. But RTI is maybe, I'm not sure that you're the most advanced, but you're so close, it's hard to tell. All these firms brag about themselves, so I really can't be sure about that. But I know that we have a long way to go, all of us, even though we're now using our technologies in a right way. We're using, thanks to other ideas, we're using our own fabrication to understand, that's imputation, to understand fabrication. That's Alan's point. And now we're using our techniques here to get at the actual bad guys. But we're not cooperating enough here. We're still competing. We should stop competing on this issue. This is an issue we should get together. The current director of the Census Bureau, John Thompson, who I used to work for at NORC, brought the survey firms, the major survey firms together, and they did, but this is quite a while ago now, they did get a bit of sharing. That needs to happen again. That needs to happen again. I used that information or suggestions when I was criticizing the Lancet survey at an ASA session. Okay, and the person who was going to give me more information later, so I held back some of my best criticisms, and at the end of he fooled me. At the end of the thing, he said, "No, we're not going to do it." No. So I then went to NEAAPOR, and they were debarred from giving surveys for 2 years as a result of the falsification potential in their survey. I would say on Rita that catching early is a key. And linking what she's talked about to adaptive designs, which you almost would have said, because you know all about this. I mean, you are so famous. It's unbelievable. Just say yes. People say yes. People, when I compliment people, people need to just immediately say yes so I can stop complimenting them. Otherwise, I can't stop. The adaptive design is such a wonderful tool for us to catch early. Catching early is the key. Catching on the training side is a key. And we could do that, some of that catching early, but it really matters to see a picture, a larger than just one person picture. And that's what adaptive designs can help us do. I want to talk about one more thing, which I'll put here, but it could have come anywhere. Moving away from data quality to information quality. We're talking about fabrication as a data issue, but implicitly we're talking about it as an information issue too. Because the customers care about the information. How they get the information, as long as they aren't getting criticized for it, it doesn't matter that much to them, as long as the information is good. Now, information quality is not a new idea, it's an old idea. But it is not true that data quality, that it is information quality is a necessary, that having data quality is a necessary and sufficient condition for having information quality. You can have information quality with much less data, good data than maybe we are doing now. But you have to change the techniques. So you balance things. And frankly, in the survey business, data quality is not an option we have available to us in the United States with all of the non-response. It's not available. Cutting down the size of the industry. I'm doing a survey, again, that I did 7 years ago with businesses. And 7 years ago, we had a terrible response rate. Now, we think the response rate is an order of magnitude less good. Well, and people want to give us some money. Well, I like that. But they want to give us at a fixed price, and get a quality at a fixed price. Well, that's a lot of risk. So information is an important issue to talk about more. Let me deal with Michael's paper, the last paper, all right, and then one comment about I was at the eye level, and I'm going to go a little further down talk about my children at that level. At those days, 2 and 4. I love the record linkage stuff. It's really important. Alan mentioned it too. The need to develop a system which you can trust in. Trust in the system, not just in the people. People will disappoint you. When I get up in the morning and look at myself, I am disappointed about what I did and didn't do yesterday. Okay, so I disappoint myself, and I'm willing to cut myself slack. So other people, I don't know. My wife will tell you. So we have to develop a system which we can trust. And we had a president, the same president whom I criticized earlier, about the one-off, the man who, the woman who. His phrase was trust but verify. And I talked about trust but certify. And using the metaphor of the finance industry, but also it's the metaphor of the data quality of the missing data. Sorry, getting it right here. Of the fabrication of the disclosure issue. That's the HIPAA problem, which I work in also. And we have to certify people, and mostly it's in the insurance business, in the health area, and those are really hard problems. And people, for various commercial reasons, want to push the edge of the envelope. And the need to do that, to do recertifications all the time, is key. I'm done, except my eye level, my below eye level. When my kids were young, we used to play a game. You have children, you know. High, low, you're too slow, right? We're too slow. We're too slow. We have to change. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. If I could just have the panelists come up and array themselves here behind the table. We have some microphones that we can use for the Q&A.
I'm going to sit back down there because I have a mic. So, Alan, you might sit back down there. Do you have a mic? Let them have the mics up here.
Okay, so what do we have? We have some more chairs.
Well, they're going to put some.
And while we're
chairs.
getting
You can sit here if you want.
situated,
I'm gonna sit over
if
here.
people watching the live stream want to either enter questions in the comment section below the live stream or tweet us questions at the hashtag shown on the screen, we'll include those in the Q&A as well. Rich, if you could just bring up any that come through. Okay, so the first question that I suppose is for any of you is there any indication of the characteristics of the type of place where you tend to see this sort of problem? In other words, could you guess where this problem is going to arise, or do you really just have to go into looking at the different data sets from the areas where you survey, knowing nothing about where you might see the problems arise? Yeah, go ahead, Rita.
I would suggest that
A little closer. Or maybe he hasn't turned it up yet.
Can you hear me?
No, I
Okay.
can't.
I would suggest there's probably, if you were looking at a distribution and be a multimodal distribution, there's probably a lot of factors, and you might be able to recognize some, but there will always be rogue situations that you haven't encountered yet. And I'll give you a couple of examples there, if I can remember them long enough to say them. In I think it was 2011, there was a small retrospective study of the interviewer characteristics from a survey done at RTI. And I think this has been published, and so if anybody wants it, I can find the citation. But they found that new interviewers tended to falsify more than old ones. And I would say that is probably the case because some people start interviewing, don't know what they're getting into, and perhaps Mike's example of the guy who did one that was probably real and a lot that were fake, found how hard it was. But also the more experienced interviewers have gotten away with it if they are falsifiers, and so you don't notice them. So it gives the appearance of having, the experienced interviewers being more trustworthy. And in general, they probably are because you weed out the ones that aren't. But there's also a second category, the experienced interviewers who get complacent or who know the system so well that they then figure out how to get away with fabrication, or at least they think they can. And someone was quoting Tukey. Tukey actually said that a good curbstoner may actually provide better data than the real survey interviewers.
Yeah.
And then there's the ones that you just can't predict based on what you know so far.
Fritz, did you
Can
say
I
that?
jump in?
Yeah.
It's a U-shaped distribution. At the beginning, people aren't very. I have one. At the beginning, there's a lot of. I'm not sure they just don't. I don't maybe don't know the job, but they're doing a lousy job. And at the end, they're so good at what they do that they don't need to ask the questions. They can answer them. And if you're doing cluster sampling in the field, and you're doing large clusters, say in rural areas, very, very similar, everyone there. Well, you don't need to do them all, okay? And so you don't. You go back and fix them later. That's a real problem. And I'm watching a caddy operation, computer-assisted telephone interviewing, which was on-site in those days. And I'm watching the keystrokes. And the interviewer is answering the question before the respondent has asked it. Okay? And often, not always, that's the problem. Often they got the same answer. But when they didn't get the same answer, it caused a lot of hell. And sometimes they just forget. They don't know I'm listening. So, well, there are a lot of stories. Enough.
Gina had something.
Quickly, I think it's a good question to which we don't really have an answer. And I think I'd like to just put it out there. I mean, we've heard anecdotes from the United States and probably other similar countries where conditions we think are pretty good for doing this kind of work. We've seen it, of course, in various places around the world, but I just don't think we empirically know if we're talking about locations around the world. So I guess it's sort of a call for compiling that and looking at that in a more systematic way.
Okay. Questions from the audience? Yeah, just wait for the microphone so the people on the live stream can hear.
So my question is sort of where the balance is. You've mentioned both that all of these models get better and are more robust the greater the N, the longer time you've gotten a chance to do it. But at the same time, you want to detect it early because no one wants to throw out hundreds, thousands of interviews after the fact. So I don't know, what's the best time? How much do you need to say, I've got enough data to know it's not good? I mean, I know it's going to change, but just any guidance on where in that process?
If the fabricator is good, Alan made this point, then maybe you don't need to throw the data out. Okay? I mean, proxy respondents are fabricating the data for the live respondent, okay? And if you look at their data, they're actually better responders for some variables than the actual person themselves, okay? Interestingly enough, and if you know in American households, usually the proxy respondent is the head of the house, the woman, head of the household these days. They're doing a better job than their adult children, although sometimes they're not doing as well as their adult children because they don't know enough of their adult children's lives. I think that it depends. So you catch the really bad fabricators early and get rid of them, and then you learn how to manage the roughness of the data. I mean, in the CPS, a third of the interviews, the income data is fabricated, hot tech, a third. Well, that's a pretty big number, and it's going to get worse. Okay, and can you deal with that? Yes, you can. Unfortunately, the Census Bureau is still not calculating the variances properly, despite Don Rubin. And I went to them and I said, "You know what Don did? Could you please?" And I was a little more both tactful and not tactful. You know, I'm at that U-shaped distribution. Here I'm talking publicly. There I'm talking guy to guy, and they're still not doing it. Although they've begun to hear me, because the fabrication issue in terms of the hot tech at the Census Bureau is not the dominant problem. The dominant problem is the way the questions are asked. Okay, and that's the dominant problem, and that's not going to get solved. What we have to do is get the margin of error big enough so we interpret the data properly.
Anyone else want to chime in on that one?
Can I just quickly? I don't really have an answer to your question. I mean, obviously, the sooner the better in terms of catching any problems, and that again, is part of that holistic. You have to institute some very standard procedures for checks while things are coming in. And hopefully that's a function of working really well with the implementer in the field. I do want to kind of completely disagree with the idea of proxy, information proxy interviews, I guess. It's interesting to us when people don't have well-formed opinions about things. It's both an indicator to us of maybe the questions we're asking are not great, and so we need to rejigger those, but also the topics, the salience of the topics for people. So I really do think that, we have to think about the circumstances in which we make
Agree.
claims like that.
None of my work is on attitudes. It's all on
So there you go.
quantitative information.
I think that's probably the key
I
difference.
well, I take this back for a second. There's a paper on Armenia where in Armenia they do substitution. They don't actually do interviews. And that's not just in Armenia. There's a lot of countries, including in Europe. They don't actually do they go next door.
Yeah.
Okay, or they go to the next door that they can get opened, okay, and use an interview there. And for a long time, they weren't keeping track of how much substitution was going on. Well, I found out about the substitution. What am I going to do? Tell them that they're wrong? No. I mean, yes, but no. I want to track it, measure it, all right, and then adjust for it, okay, because it affects the variance. Fortunately, in Armenia, where they're still a very rural country, they're very large households, and even though many of the people in the households are working overseas in Russia often, and sending money home, you can still get pretty good information about the person who's left. Okay, often an older person or a woman with a young child. Okay, and they get you pretty good information, and then you can adjust for the fact that you have an age bias, too many old people and too many young people, and not enough middle income people, people in the middle ages. You can adjust for that afterwards, and after you've adjusted it, the results are almost, for the variables that poverty, which is what I care about, almost indistinguishable from what you did before. But of course, you have to fix the age distribution.
Other questions? Oh, did someone, I'm sorry, Rita wanted to add something to that, and then we'll come to your question.
I actually wanted to ask for a clarification. Were you asking about when to stop a particular interviewer who's suspected of fabrication, or when to stop running a survey because you think you have enough information to draw your conclusions from? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask really a question of curiosity about this. Early on, you drew an analogy between the problem that's under discussion today and problems in terms of hacking and other kinds of IT stuff. And one of the tactics that's been used, I think, in those situations is to engage the sophisticated hackers in designing solutions to the problem. And I just wondered, for those of you who are out there on the front lines, and it's wonderful to see people there, have you the person who duplicates 785 interviews, I don't think we need to learn from that person about how the system was being subverted, but the sort of fearsome case is the sophisticated hacker who can use multiple imputation methodology in making up the interviews.
In SAS.
Pardon?
They get it in SAS.
Well,
It's off the shelf.
Yeah, it's easy to do now.
but I think it would be interesting to engage some of these people in
And
the
we do.
diagnosis of this.
And we do. But it isn't, I mean, that's one of the things I emphasize. I didn't say it as well as you just did. Thank you, by the way. We need to pay attention to the fabricator, not just to the fabrication. That's what I said earlier. We don't do it. They're embarrassed. Some of them are legally, at risk here. So we need to deal with that a little better. but we do.
Employing some of them actually might
By
make
employing them
sense if
again,
they're
that's
really
right,
good.
yeah, yeah. That might create some other incentives if we employ too many of them.
So a question for Michael and Gina specifically. You both, Michael, you discussed some of the countries where you've experienced this, and Gina, you made
No, you don't
some
have-
comments about addressing this in a more sort of systematic and open way, and building trust rather than tearing down trust through sort of addressing it intentionally. How have you found your respective audiences reacting to this? Have they reacted at all? Have they said anything? Or is this something that's just now starting to bubble up and there hasn't been time for reaction yet?
You mean my audience?
In other words, you've got an audience for the Error Barometer. You've been, it's online. You've written journal articles about it and so forth. You've got consumers, so to speak. As this has been addressed and been addressed publicly, how has your audience reacted? Have they at all, or has it sort of flown under the radar?
With some of the newest things that we're doing, particularly with AB3, I mean, it's not something that we've really seen a reaction to at this point. I think that people, one of the things that we try and do is make data public in difficult situations where there's not necessarily a lot of data. I think in Yemen, I believe this is true, this may not quite be, but at least publicly available national data sets, it was only the second time this had ever been done. So it's a difficult situation, and we're trying to work through that. And certainly one of the things that we are encouraged by in Yemen is that if you run that distribution now, I mean, it looks quite good. I mean, that we've actually built over this time, working with the local researcher, a different person now, who's at the University of Sana'a, that we've done a fairly good job in improving that. And so I think that people are encouraged that that there's actually attention to these methods and trying to get the best quality data out that we can. I mean, of course, it's always disappointing when there are these issues, but I think certainly knowing that researchers are dealing with them and trying to deal with them seriously and working hard to ensure high quality data is perhaps the most encouraging thing that, for the validity of the survey.
Ditto, pretty much. I mean, our audience is much more narrow. It's U.S. government focused, but just acknowledging to even within our audience that these things come up, it's probably something that they suspect happens. It does happen, and saying, yes, it does happen, and here's how we deal with it, helps our cause quite a bit in terms of our credibility. So I think it's received well.
Okay. Any questions from online? Other questions from in the room? We have a question in the back.
Thank you, everyone. This is great. I deal a lot with data validity from the respondent side, and I find that a lot of it's either due to the laziness of the respondent, just kind of going through and filling it out because they're not interested in the topic or whatever, and then the social side of things. So I guess one question I have for you is: do you notice with any specific topics that you see a higher level of falsification from the interviewer side? Maybe there being like a sensitive topic or controversial topic that they may not feel comfortable conducting the interview, so therefore they falsify the information more.
Yeah, it's something that we'd be interested in looking at more. I mean, we haven't done that extensively. I mean, I do think it is intriguing and something that we discovered fairly recently in, say, the Morocco case, where we had two interviewers on a specific set of topics. There's a variety of reasons that could be. I mean, it may just be the personal biases. It may be they didn't want to ask those questions in that environment. I mean, there's a variety of potential reasons that could be. But so certainly, I think there likely is something to that line of reasoning, and something that we hopefully will be able to look to more in the future. I mean, we do ask a lot of sensitive questions, a lot of questions that are difficult, and certainly that's worthy of future research.
I mean, I would say that's pretty much just as important as gathering the data from the falsified interviews to try to pinpoint who is a falsifier. Understanding, and again, going back to understanding the conditions through which people are tempted or the reasons for which people falsify, I think that's a critical one. And I have to say, I have some notions, and it's about political sensitivity and other social sensitivities that would create those conditions. But I think it's a great idea to look at it more systematically.
I would agree with Gina very strongly, and with Mike. You have to look at the conditions around the survey, the circumstances, and the topics all together. I think it was in New England Journal of Medicine just recently, a discussion of not exactly a survey, but kind of data collection effort in South Africa having to do with, I believe, the use
That's right, yeah.
of
Yeah, HIV.
it was an HIV study, right? Anyway, so prevention study. And the culture in the area, this was women coming into a clinic, and they were supposed to report, to what extent they had followed the protocol, and then they would be tested. And the culture of the area was such that it put enormous pressure on these women to say that they conformed to the protocol, because then they would get paid and then they would get free health care. But in fact, they were not. And so it was a case of respondent falsification, which could very closely be tied, or very clearly be tied, to the subject matter of the data collection effort.
Fritz, you had something?
That suggests even more comment. Let me make 2 points. First of all, the Armenia study is in the September issue of the journal that I edit. Okay, if you want to follow up on that, the issue about how you pick the interviewer, or how you pick the evaluation of the interview. Remember that an election is a survey. And when we had this problem in 2000 in Florida, remember all of it? All of you remember that? What a disaster. Newark got a chance to re-examine the data, all of the data. And what we did, and it's all published in the American Statistician, what we did was we looked at who was counting Chads, if you remember that god-awful time. And there were people that were extreme on the right side, whether, if it depends on which side you want, whether right is right or right is left, but left being, remember, in Latin is sinister, or dark, or they were on the other side. And the people who were extreme, we just didn't use them. And people who were moderate in the middle, 3 groups in the middle, we did use them. And we did everything 3 times. They were close at that point. They were close. And all that stuff we were watching on TV, God help us. My wife is an election official in Alexandria, and she was so angry. And my sister, who's living in West Palm Beach, was so angry because, oh well, forget that. Enough of that stuff. Too long ago, I hope.
We have just a few more minutes, so I want to pose one question that any of you are free to address as we close. It's actually 2 parts. One is, how much of this do you feel now that we're catching with what we've done right now? Are we just starting to scratch the surface, or do you feel like we have a pretty good handle on the size of the issue? And then the second question, which is what consumers of surveys, rather than the people in this room, would want to know, is can they trust what they read? If they pick up a newspaper, read an article online about an international survey done in some of the areas we're describing, can they trust it? Because that more than the technical question is what people reading about this issue will want to know. So anybody who wants to pick up either of those questions.
I'll jump in since I don't know anything. I think if you take this perspective that there's a continuum from outright, massive intentional fabrication to just poorly designed surveys, then there's got to be a lot out there, because we know that surveys are this very, they're this weird social interaction that, I'm talking about, opinion surveys or subjective kinds of surveys, not measuring records in a medical office. There's this weird social interaction that we do, and we somehow take the results of that and they take them as meaning something. Mm-hmm. And they're sometimes meaningful, and sometimes they mean something different from what we think they mean, and sometimes they don't mean anything at all. And with all the various things that have to go right for them to be meaningful in the way they want them to, there's got to be a lot going on out there which has an element of volition of the people up and down the structure of the survey operation, and that volition could be called fabrication.
I'm not going to say any more. I've been quiet. Haven't I been quiet, people?
Both of you sort of thinking about what, saying something.
So to your first question, I mean, I think that Fritz has said certainly that there's always different issues that are coming up. There's always different types of falsification that we need to try and stay ahead. That certainly it's a challenge, and it's something that we know is out there that I think, we have techniques and can continue to pursue more ways to try and find this. And I think that that's something that we should do, and that hasn't been done as thoroughly as perhaps it should be. And I know we all try, we all are busy. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort to do this, but I think it is very important. I mean, for the second question, to make sure that we do that, and that we build in the time, and we keep abreast of the resources and the research that is out there to try and identify these issues. I mean, in terms of the trust, I think that Alan put it quite well, that that it is important to make sure that the people doing the surveys have done this and gone through. But I think that if they have, and that it's through a reliable organization or one that's really paying attention to these issues, certainly you can believe it. And I think that most our organizations are doing their best and are working to try and minimize these issues as best they can. And so certainly, I think that it's with anything that you can't. You need to be cautious with what you read and what you see, but certainly, I do think you can trust it. I don't think that the polls are bad on the whole.
A quick follow-up, and I find myself agreeing again with everything that you said. How much are we catching? I don't think we're catching everything. I think that's why we need to develop new techniques and better methods. Can people trust what they read about polls? I mean, yeah, the polling organizations, the reputable polling organizations are doing good work. One twist on that is that a lot of the reporting you see on polls can be very misleading. So that's just, it's just a little wrinkle in that. So there's a lot of data out there, and I think the people in this room and probably the people watching are not the problem, so to speak. I think we all have a good faith effort to make sure what we put out there is solid and well grounded. So.
Right, Rita, you have the last word.
Well, I don't know if it deserves to be the last word, but what I would say is that in this country we saw a drop, or at least I would say we probably saw a drop. We have some evidence that we saw a drop in the amount of fabrication when we went from paper to electronics. And you can go back and you can find, paper surveys where there's been a lot of obvious sort of fakery. And that in the parts of the world where we're still dependent on paper, it's very difficult to control, as both Mike and Gina, have discussed. And to the extent, of course, I'm giving you the view of a technologist, but to the extent that we can use some of these new tools, we think they do improve the situation. And we're in one of, we did an internal study of some of our audio recordings, and what we found in over many tens of thousands of recordings is that mostly what we detected was mistakes and, perhaps misunderstandings or not doing such a good job, but not deliberate falsification. I mean, there are some deliberate falsifiers, but mostly it's just kind of sloppiness, and that the level of deliberate falsification is fairly low. But that's with this huge amount of supervision.
Great. Well, unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our scheduled time. Thank you, everybody in the room. Thank you for those who tuned in the live stream. Thank you to the other folks from NEAAPOR and the American Statistical Association. And thank you very much, Chase, and the Harvard Program on Survey Research for hosting us today. I hate to ask this, but we need to be out of the room by 12. So if you could congregate out in the hallways to have any post-event conversations, that would be terrific.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you to our
Thank you,
panelists
Steve.
and to our discussants.